This meeting is being recorded.
There you go. All right. So we are going to find the right desktop, and there we go. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay, perfect. Always the technical difficulties to get started. Okay. So now it's blocking it. There we go. Okay. All right. Welcome everyone to this month's Tallgrass webinar. This month we're going to be talking about the immune system because we're moving into the season of metal, and which is why we're also going to talk about seasonal transitions. So we'll walk through a couple of things, and then we're going to look at some acupressure points that help during specific transitions, starting with late summer to fall. So traditional Chinese medicine actually has 5 seasons, but we'll get more into that as we go through. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat or just say them out loud. Either or, I'll be able to see them. So if we haven't met before, my name is Jessie McCowan. I'm the educational director / lead instructor for Tallgrass North America. And that is my pup Kaya, who helps me with demos during webinars. So something that we often see is that people with a biology background who understand the physiology from a Western perspective come to the classes and they start learning traditional Chinese medicine. And there's a lot of similarities between the Western understanding and the Eastern understanding, but it gets a little more complex when you start looking at the biochemistry of the body and how everything works together. So one of you has a little bit of background noise. If you could just mute yourself, that would be great. So traditional Chinese medicine understanding, we're going to get a little bit into biochemistry, but understanding how the immune system works and how the 5 phases of transformation occur, which we're going to learn about, how we can help our animals transition better, and how acupressure can help with that. So a general overview for our webinar today. We're going to first talk about the immune system from a TCM perspective. We're going to learn about qi and its role in the immune system. So we did a webinar 2 months ago about the vital substances, and we talked a lot about qi in that webinar. So if it's not an area that you're really confident in, I would suggest going back to watch that first, because we're going to take it a little step further today. We're obviously going to talk about seasonal transitions, walk through the correspondence chart. There's usually questions about that one. And then go into some acupoints for those seasonal transitions and how you can support your animal through the equinox that we had, I guess it was last week. So we're moving into our fall season, and you're going to see a lot of similar conditions if you're doing acupressure. So we're going to help you identify some points to work through those. So you'll recognize this slide from some of our other webinars, because the understanding of health in traditional Chinese medicine has always been the same, that our balance of yin and yang has to be there. If you've taken our overview class, this chart will look very familiar to you, because quite often when we're looking at our assessment, we're trying to figure out, is it an excess condition? Is it a deficient condition? And is it due to an imbalance of yin or yang? So having a balance of the two really helps keep the body healthy and make sure that everything flows smoothly, because of all the jobs of qi that we mentioned in 2 months ago's webinar. Having the harmonious flow of qi is also really important. This is primarily the job of the liver. We remember the liver's most important job is to make sure everything is flowing harmoniously, because if it's not, if qi is stagnated, that quite often presents in the body as pain, and if it's longer term, can develop into more serious illnesses. Our last example of health is the correct amount and the correct quality of vital substances. So again, we did a webinar last month going over blood, qi, shen, essence, and body fluids, but understanding how they work together will help you with the biochemistry of the immune system. So we're going to get into, how does the immune system actually function? Okay. So the Western understanding of the immune system, we have our autonomic immune system, which automatically responds to things if we're healthy. So when the pathogens invade our body, our immune system can respond because it can identify that these are foreign substances to the body. This is when our B and T cells get involved and they mount an attack essentially on the invaders in our body. So animals that have, and people who have autoimmune diseases, their immune system has a hard time recognizing invaders versus cells that are already part of their body, which is why their cells essentially attack themselves. And it can be very, very complex to fix and work on autoimmune conditions. From a more traditional Chinese medicine perspective, we're talking about Zheng Qi. And this is essentially the body's resistance. It's our ability to mount a defense against invading pathogens in the body. So in order for our Zheng Qi to be strong, it has to be supported by strong source Qi. So this is something that you're born with. And again, you want to learn more about the different types of Qi, I recommend watching the Vital Substances webinar. We have to have strong food Qi and Yin Qi, meaning the food that we eat and our ability to break it down will determine how strong our Wei Qi is, which is our last type of Qi. And usually when we think of the immune system, we teach you that the Wei Qi is a very big part of the immune system, and it is, but there's a little more to it. So and I read this in a traditional Chinese medicine textbook that it will be referenced at the end. So if you have more questions about where that information came from, I will let you know the books at the end. But essentially, if our Zheng Qi, or what's called our anti-pathogenic Qi, meaning it's fighting against the pathogen, is strong, the body is less likely to get sick. But if our Zheng Qi, or our anti-pathogenic Qi, is weaker than the invading pathogen or pathogenic Qi, the pathogen will invade the body and the animal or person will get sick. Think about it a little bit like a battlefield. You have your body's immune response on one side and the invading pathogen on the other side. And a little like capture the flag. If the invading pathogen can't get to the flag, your body will remain strong. But at some point, they're in the same space. And this is where it comes down to the quality of our Qi will determine how strong our Zheng Qi or our immune defense is. The animal will recover if our Zheng Qi is strong. It may initially invade the body, and this is when you have excess conditions or acute conditions where it originally invades the body, but the body is strong enough to fight it off. This is also why excess conditions are more common in younger or healthier animals. And when you get to deficient conditions or more long-term conditions, the Zheng Qi is depleted, and so the pathogen has time to invade further and further into the body. So a little bit more about pathology. So we have our source Qi, which we all know is from our kidneys, right? Our source Qi is housed in our kidneys. And if we have healthy kidney essence, which is our source Qi, that greatly affects the quality of our blood. So if we have nice, healthy blood, means that everything's flowing smoothly, our blood is taking the nutrients where we need it to, and our system will be stronger for it. The food Qi and the Yin Qi transform stem cells, which are essentially default factory cells that have yet to be determined what they're supposed to do. So basically, the food Qi then helps to transform them into the different parts of the immune system. So the words neutrophil and lymphocytes may sound familiar, but these are then used to help make strong nutrient Qi, which is also an ingredient of both blood and our Wei Qi, which is our exterior immune system. So hopefully that wasn't too biology heavy for you, but that's essentially how the Eastern pathology works. And again, they like to, yes, go ahead.
Is this information in the material we have now?
Some of it is, some of it is in separate textbooks that I've referenced at the end of the webinar. There'll be a reference slide that lists the textbooks, names, and authors.
Okay, so this is not in our books.
No.
Okay.
The rest of it
Okay.
should be. That's the most complicated part, so I figured I'd get the hard part out of the way, and then the rest should be a little more logical.
Well, it's not that it's hard. It's
Mhm.
that I haven't had access to it.
Yes. Okay. So in traditional Chinese medicine, we talked about what causes illness. This is when the anti-pathogenic qi or your Zheng qi is weaker than the invading pathogenic qi. So pathogens are actually only the condition under which the disease occurs, because if the body's strong, the pathogen can't come in. So if this, then this means that it's conditional, and that doesn't mean that it's the environment under which it occurs, which we're going to get to in a minute. If the body fails to adapt and maintain that balance of yin and yang, this is when the disease occurs, which is when you get excess or deficient conditions. You can also have illness when there's a derangement of qi and blood. So when there's an improper quantity or quality of either, they are also very closely connected. And if, for example, someone has a very serious injury and they're bleeding out, that's actually yin separating from yang. And this is usually when more severe illness occurs. The last is a disturbance in the ascending and descending function of the organs. So does anybody remember which direction lung qi is supposed to go?
Down?
Yes. So when we breathe air, it has to be dispersed through our body, but essentially it's supposed to go down, because if it rebels and comes up the other direction, that's when you have things like burping and coughing. What about stomach qi? Does it go up or down?
It should go down.
Yes. So if you think about our digestive system, it starts in our mouth, moves down our throat, down to our stomach, and then through our intestines. If it comes up the other way, this is vomiting. So if the qi from each organ is not going in the correct direction, this is obviously going to disrupt the process of the harmonious flow of qi in the body. So you have to look at then which meridian's qi is going the wrong way, and how can we help address that. This slide will also look familiar if you attended the webinar from 2 months ago. We looked at the functions of qi, and I highlighted 2 of them for you, because the primary functions of qi are to promote movement, growth, and development, to warm the body, but also defend against internal and external pathogens, and help to maintain the balance between yin and yang of the body and the amount of vital substances. So if you look at number 4, this is basically describing a healthy animal. If your qi is strong, you'll be able to maintain that balance, and you'll have the correct quantity and quality of both vital substances and yin and yang in your body. But I want to talk a little bit more about number 3. There is going to be a webinar in November about the 6 exogenous pathogens, so we're not going to get into it in too much depth, but just know we're going to focus on qi quite a bit in this webinar. Okay, so what influences the health of our immune system?
Did you do number 5? I'm sorry. Did you do Qihua or?
Qihua is also one of the 5 functions. We talk about it more in depth in the previous webinar, but basically it's the spark of life. It's the energetic activation from the kidney that sends the spark, because that source qi has to get to all the other meridians, and the avenue of original qi, or the triple heater, is going to take that source qi from the kidneys and spread it throughout the body, but it can't do that without the qihua.
Is this is when you're born, the Qihua? Like it says, provide the spark of life. Is this when you're born?
Yes, that's when the source chi gets moved throughout the body. So the word hua, literal translation means manifestation. So the way that chi manifests in the body is our aliveness, essentially. You can tell when people, have been sick for a while and their eyes are dull. They're still alive. They still have shen and they still have chi, but their chi hua, because the chi in their body may be imbalanced, is going to be a little bit weaker. But the initial action of chi hua does happen when you're born. That make sense?
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So what influences the health of the immune system? We can think of a lot of obvious things, but there's quite a few that I want to add a little bit more detail to because quite often they get overlooked. So the first and most obvious is the overall health of the animal. Any animal that has a chronic illness or an early life physical trauma is going to need long-term care, but also their chi and their body may need a lot more support than animals that are healthy and have no difficulties in their early life. This could also be an animal with a poor diet or a mineral deficiency. So this could result in animals with weak stomach and spleen chi, which we know earth is the element for stomach and spleen, and this is the root of the body. So any animal that has weak stomach or spleen chi is going to have a really hard time because they can't digest their food properly and they can't absorb the nutrients from their food, which means they're going to be lethargic. They're going to have a lot of digestive issues. They're probably going to be irritable, and their joints may not be as strong because they're not able to absorb the nutrients from the food that their tendons, ligaments, and bones need to be able to help them thrive in their life. We also think a little bit about older animals, so those that don't get enough exercise or are constrained to a certain area during the day. So animals that, for example, are on stall rest, if it's a horse, or if the dog's in a crate all day while their owner's at work, the health of this animal is going to be weaker, and we're going to talk about why in the next couple of slides. The health of the lung organ system. So if we think about the quality of the air that you breathe depends not only on where you live, but it usually depends on what type of environment you live in. So if, for example, you live in a city versus the country, that would obviously greatly affect the quality of the air you breathe. But if you think about the country, for example, if you live in Russia, the quality of the air you breathe is going to be different, city versus country, but you also have to think about the climate because cold air can shock the lungs. So you want to have relatively room temperature or body temperature air because it's easier for a body to process. If it is cold air you're breathing in, it can actually cause an invasion of cold in the body, which is a pathogen, one of the 6 major pathogens that, again, we're going to talk about in November. Health of the lung tissue, quite honestly, is highly related to genetics, but also if you have an animal from a highly populated city that grew up on the street, they're probably breathing in a lot of exhaust, or cities that are overpopulated, they're probably breathing in a lot of dangerous chemicals and things like that in their air that they normally wouldn't. So you have to look at the literal health and how healthy the lungs are, if they're nice and pink and well oxygenated, and the circulation of everything in there. Moisture quantity, if the air you're breathing is really dry, for example, animals that live near the desert or other really dry places, they're going to have a hard time getting the moisture they need in order for the lungs to function properly. Now we know, because most of the people watching this have taken overview of TCM, we know that the lungs can't function without moisture, and neither can its sister pair, the large intestine. They both need a lot of moisture to be able to do their job. If there's too much moisture, that can be an invasion of dampness. And again, that's one of the 6 major pathogens. But everything in traditional Chinese medicine, you'll notice, is about balance. So you don't want to have too little of something and you don't want to have too much of something. Animals that have a weaker lung system are also more prone to allergies. This is also true for people. So those that, for example, my brother had croup when he was born, and he had to be in an oxygen tent for 2 weeks in the NICU when he was born, and his lung system has always been weaker. So he's more prone to, when he gets sick, conditions of the lung and the respiratory system, which would be an example of somebody with early life damage to the health of the lung tissue. Something else.
So oxygen, forgive me,
No, go ahead.
oxygen as a neonatal is not good?
It is, but essentially his lungs were born weak, which is why he had to be put on oxygen, because he was having a hard time breathing when he was a baby. So his lungs were actually, when we're talking about the health of the lung tissue, his lungs were physically born to be weaker than the average person.
Because he had oxygen?
No, because he had croup. They gave him oxygen treatment. Yes.
Okay.
I should have clarified that.
Having oxygen in a neonatal would not weaken the lungs. It was because he had the croup.
Yes, so giving them oxygen would actually help because it's adding more oxygen to the body. So even if his system is weaker, it has more oxygen to work with. So the lungs are, he seems to be relatively okay now, but during certain seasons, especially the metal season, which we're going to talk about, he has a little more respiratory issues, but the oxygen does help, which is quite often why older people carry around oxygen tanks, because sometimes their lungs are weaker and they can't get enough air. So just adding more oxygen to the environment makes it easier for them to breathe. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think I'd heard it wrong. I thought you said because he had oxygen early, he was weak, but it was because he had the croup that he had the oxygen.
Yes.
Okay.
I should have clarified because not everybody knows what croup is. And we're talking about animals usually, we're not talking about human conditions. The last thing I want to mention about the lung is that animals that are grieving, who have lost a sibling, a parent, a person in their household, someone from the barn, a staff person leaves, that the lung tissue actually physically thickens and makes it harder to breathe. So if we think about someone grieving, or actually even someone having a panic attack, quite often it's really hard for them to get a full breath because the tissues are thicker. So if you...
Does it recover?
It does. If it's something like long-term grief where it's been, 5 years and they're still grieving, it can actually cause physical damage to the lung tissue, and then you would have a deficient condition. If it's something short-term where it's, a month or so, then it's more excess and it may not cause permanent damage to the lung. But if it is long-term, it can cause deficiencies.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about Wei Qi again. We remember that Wei Qi has 2 ingredients. The first is our nutrient qi, and the second is our chest qi, which pretty simple. Normally when you talk to Eastern pathology doctors, they'll say, what do you prescribe? And they'll say something like fresh air and a healthy diet of foods. Most doctors will tell this to you because they're the basic ingredients to having a healthy lifestyle. So in order to have healthy nutrient qi, it does have to do with the quality of the food you eat, but it also has to do with the ability of the digestive system, which includes not only the stomach and the spleen, but the large intestine and the small intestine, to break down nutrients properly. So if any of those 4 systems are unbalanced, the quality of your nutrient qi is going to be affected. When it comes to chest qi, it has to do with the quality of the air you breathe. So if you have someone that's a professional long distance runner athlete, their aerobic capacity is going to be very strong, which means that their chest qi is going to be very healthy because their circulation is good. They're always breathing fresh air. They have good lung health. If, on the other hand, you have somebody who, doesn't move around a lot because they have a lot of joint pain, their aerobic capacity is going to be very low, meaning they can't actually take a full deep breath, and their chest chi is going to be weaker. So depending on the quality of these two ingredients will determine how strong your wei qi is. Remember, wei qi is made in the lungs using these two ingredients, and then it's spread throughout the body, but mostly to the surface of the skin because that's our exterior immune system. All right, talking about the health of the digestive system. The stomach's job in traditional Chinese medicine is to break the food into digestible pieces. So this quite often gets confused with Western, because people assume that the stomach does 90% of the work. But because spleen is the yin organ of the earth pair, it actually has more jobs than the stomach. So it is also responsible for the originator of fluids, which means if the amount of body fluids is not balanced in the body, that has to do with the stomach. And of course, because stomach is the yang sister pair, its job is to support the spleen and its functions, which include transforming the food into nutrients. So once the stomach breaks it down, if you think about taking big chunks into smaller chunks, then the spleen transforms that and breaks it down further into nutrients that can be absorbed by the body, which it then transports in order to make sure that the blood is healthy and the nutrients are getting where they're supposed to get to, which is why it's the origin of nutrient qi. It also sends the nutrients to the heart because that's where the heart is responsible for circulation. So that's where that's spread out. We have the latter half of the digestive system, the large intestine, which its job is to receive food and water from the small intestine and reabsorb those fluids because it is the sister pair to the lung. And we know how important moisture is for these two. The small intestine receives the food from the spleen and helps to transform it further. This has to do with our ability to discern because it separates turbid or dirty from clear fluids and recycles the clear fluids to be used by the body. So if the intestines aren't functioning and you get a lot of irritation when you're trying to digest your food, that's probably a small intestine problem and something you may want to look into. With dogs, it's hard to tell, but which is why the analysis of the poop gets included in our 4 exams, because you can learn a lot about looking at your dog's stool or your horse's manure. Everyone's favorite topic. Okay, circulatory health, of course, is very important for the immune system because if our body, we're not getting enough movement quantity-wise, that things are not going to be moving, and it's going to make the liver's job harder and the heart to be able to maintain the harmonious flow of qi. So making sure we're meeting the minimum suggestions both for the breed and age of the animal that you're working on. So obviously a 2-year-old animal will need more exercise than a 15-year-old animal, but some breeds that are very hyper are going to need more exercise than breeds that are a little slower, a little more laid back, but they do still need exercise. It's a common misconception, and I hear this quite a lot, that small dogs don't need exercise. Small dogs do need exercise. All dogs need exercise, but making it specific to the size, the breed, and the age of the dog is really important. And consistency, because a lot of people, if it's raining, they won't go exercise their horse if they don't have an indoor facility, or they decide they won't walk their dog because it's cold outside. And, consistency, even finding something to do inside to make sure that they get that exercise can be really important for their circulation. The quality of movement is also important. I work on quite a few animals that have repetitive strain injuries because their only form of movement is playing fetch back and forth. And that's all they do. They don't really go for walks. They don't really do anything else. So it's literally just back and forth, back and forth. So making sure that you're getting different speeds, which is talking about variety here, different terrains and inclines, different speeds, to make sure that they're using all of their body but it also makes sure that their circulatory health and their aerobic capacity are going to stay where they are. If you're someone that exercises with your animal, so if you go horseback riding or if you walk your dog, especially in the winter, it's also good for your aerobic capacity. So it's a win-win. Something that's often overlooked is that exercise is actually physical stress on the body. And if you don't give your body enough time to recover, you're just going to keep straining the body. So I had actually a conversation with a client of mine recently because she was talking about the ability to rest. So essentially, tendons and ligaments take longer to heal than some other things. But if we were talking about physiotherapy, and if your body is healthy and strong and your immune system is strong, your body will be able to recover faster, which means that that injury will heal faster. If your immune system is weak, it has to focus on protecting you from getting sick and has less energy to be able to focus on healing that injury, which is why rest is so important. And, you know, for professional athletes, they have off seasons, they have rest in between games to make sure, or for horses, for example, in between sporting events or races, to make sure that they're not overworking themselves. All right, climate is really important, and we're going to get into why, but this ties in very strongly to our conversation about pathogens. So if you think about an animal who lives in the desert, the air they're breathing is going to be hot and dry. In the mountains, there's different air pressures. Some of them are really dry, some of them are really damp. If you live somewhere in the lowlands or on a coastal area, it's going to be really damp. And if you live somewhere in the north, it's going to be cold. So climate change is causing more extreme seasonal transitions. But what do these words remind you of? Hot, dry, damp, and cold. Do they sound familiar? Go ahead.
Yin and yang.
Mm-hmm. They do. They also, well, if you think about water is traditionally cold and damp, and fire is traditionally hot and dry. Those four are actually exogenous pathogens also, because you have heat, dryness, dampness, and cold are 4 of the 6 pathogens. So if you live somewhere that has extreme climatic conditions, which I am currently in Canada, and we're transitioning into our colder seasons, and all of a sudden there's a lot more cold and dampness. So our exogenous pathogenic factors are equivalent to extreme climatic conditions, which I find really interesting because as the seasonal changes become more intense, because we used to have fairly mild winters, and now sometimes we get, 2 weeks of a blizzard or an ice storm or something like that the sudden or extreme changes can actually overwhelm the body's resistance, which is our Zheng Qi, which is also why times of transition, especially with the environment and the weather, is usually when our Zheng Qi is impaired. We're almost to the acupressure points, but I have one more to talk about. First, our lifestyle and habits. So we talked a little bit about animals that live in the city versus animals that live in the country. Sometimes animals that live in the country, have more free reign. They get more exercise because they're out all day or they're working. The cleanliness of the home has to do with exposure to chemicals. So if, for example, you use natural cleaning products and chemical-free laundry detergent, for example, your animal is going to be less exposed to those toxins and their immune system is going to be stronger. In terms of the yard, it's talking not only about pesticide, but also about things like a weed killer, or if the pasture hasn't been raked out properly, or if you haven't cleaned up your dog's stool left over from the winter and it sits there and it rots and it gets, worms or something in it, that's going to affect the health of your animal if they're running around in the yard. We did talk about cleaning products. The types of flea and tick and heartworm medication that you use, some are a lot more toxic than others, so be very careful about what you give. Types of pest control, we did talk about that. If you have, for example, a shed or a garage where you keep a lot of things that are toxic to animals, for example, like windshield washer fluid or motor oil or lubricant for a tractor or something like that. You have to be very, very careful about who gets exposed to those things, because animals are a lot closer to the ground than we are. So quite often they have a higher toxin load than we do. The types of food eaten. So if you live in a household where, nobody really taught you anything about nutrition, or maybe it's a lower income household and you can't afford to buy, 8 different supplements for yourself or your dog or your horse, that the quality of the food that you eat will also impact your immune system. If you're eating something like McDonald's every day, your immune system's probably not going to be that strong. If you're eating, fresh, homegrown vegetables and fruits and all kinds of stuff, that your body is going to have a better variety of nutrient chi, and it'll keep you nice and healthy. We also touched on consistency of exercise and rest. This is strongly tied to the lifestyles of the people who live in the household with you. If you live somewhere where exercise is not the norm, then it's quite likely that your animal will not get as much exercise, just simply because it's not part of your lifestyle. If you're someone that wakes up at 6 a.m. and goes for a ride or takes your dog for a run, that's going to be influenced strongly by your lifestyle choices. So something else to keep in mind. Now, seasonal transitions, the exciting part. So we know that there are times of transformation, not only for the temperatures outside, but the phase of life. Meaning, normally this time of year, our bodies slow down a little bit. We're more inclined to curl up and stay indoors than we are to be excited to go outside. It also changes the energetic focus of the body, which I'm going to explain when I get to the 5 phases of transformation chart. But we remember the triple heater helps with environmental changes. So if you have an animal that doesn't adjust well to changes, whether that be moving or a change in their routine or their food or anything like that, the triple heater can support adjusting to that environmental change. Okay. So when we think about, I just want to go back to the energetic focus of the body for a minute here. If we think about how our body responds in the summer, our body temperature is usually higher. Our skin is more relaxed. We sweat more and we actually urinate less. But when we're cold, which is usually in the winter seasons, our pores are actually more closed off because we sweat less, and therefore there's much more urine output. So not only biochemically wise is our body changing its priorities when the season changes, but how our body responds to the environment also changes. So they're actually communicated to the body through the air and the food that we eat. So if, for example, you go outside, and today, I think this morning it was about 10 degrees Celsius. If you went outside in a t-shirt, that seasonal change would be very clearly communicated to your body that, hey, it's getting cold outside, maybe I should put on more layers. Now, horses and dogs and cats don't always have that option unless you have a sweater, a coat, or a blanket for them. We also usually eat different types of food and different times of the year. So we usually eat more cooling, lighter foods in the summer, and we usually eat heavier, warming foods in the winter. And we actually have an entire elective course on traditional Chinese medicine, energetics of food. It's only for small animal though, but I think learning about the energetics of the different types of food and how to feed based on the animal's condition can be really helpful. But the key takeaway here is that it's mirroring the physiological changes happening in the body. So not only the amounts of yin and yang, but the actions of qi and blood as that happens in the body. So in spring and summer, we're typically warm, so our yang qi is dispersing because we're trying to keep our body from overheating. But in autumn and winter, we're typically cold, or the environment we live in is cold if you're in the northern hemisphere. So yang qi is actually stored in the body to wait to use till it gets warmer. So I want to come back to communicated to the body through air for a second. We know that those of you who have taken a class with us before have seen the 5 phases of transformation chart, which is this one. And I just want to explain something. We'll notice that there are 5 smells here in this row right here. And that has to do with the quality of the air. So we talked about how important the quality and the quantity of air that we breathe in. So this has to do with the 5 smells and the 5 tastes, which are also related to this, but you'll learn more about that in the Traditional Chinese Medicine Food Energetics class. But it has to do with the quality of the food consumed. So if you think about the 5 different tastes, I believe it's salty, sweet, sour, umami, and anybody remember the other one? Thought they all started with an S for a second. Okay, so that just ties, whoops. There we go. That just ties into how those seasonal changes are communicated to the body through the air and the food. So the smells change because as the leaves change and fall to the ground, it's usually damp. There's usually a little more mold from the leaves falling. The types of foods that we eat and that are the seasonal vegetables that we have change by the season. So that's another way that our environment cues our body to prepare for the seasonal change. Okay, so this chart may look like a lot of information, but we're only going to look at the rows that I've highlighted on the left-hand side. Something about Eastern pathology is that it's greatly tied to nature. All the examples that they use are typically related to the environment, because when traditional Chinese medicine was founded, the physicians and the doctors used nature as a way to explain what was happening in our body, and we've carried that through. So if you look at the transition or life cycle stage, we start with wood because that's when someone is born in the spring, all the flowers bloom, the new baby animals are born, you know, you have deer and birds and everything like that. When we move into summer, this is the season of creation and growth, when all of our flowers bloom nice and strong, our trees come up, our vegetables are growing. Then you have late summer. So I know I mentioned that traditional Chinese medicine has 5 seasons because we have 5 elements. So we were just in late summer. Near the tail end, it's usually the latter half of June, a bit of July and August. But this is when all of the things in nature reach maturity. Then we transition to fall, which is where we are now, which is when all of the fruits and vegetables are harvested. And then the last stage is winter or water. And this is in nature, this is when all of our food is stored and prepared to help us get through the winter. But in terms of life cycle, this is typically the issues you'll see with very senior animals. So again, this would be the season of very young, healthy animals. Then you have fire, which is, you know, like your teenage years. And then earth is kind of your middle age, moving into the middle age of metal. And then you have your older age here. The 2 things I want to point out at the bottom here, we have the governed part of the body for each of the elements, which is going to help explain certain conditions that present at certain times of year, as well as how we choose acupoints to help during this transitional period. as well as the meridians that are related to them. So we're going to start with metal because we're in metal season now as of September 24th, which is typically when you see issues related to the lung and the large intestine. So for acupoints for seasonal transitions, these are a couple of points that are really helpful for that. Typically in this time of year, you see a lot of respiratory conditions. This is also the time of year where most kids go back to school and they've been, in their own environment for a while, and now they're exposed to all these other kids, which is why a lot of kids get sick when they first go back to school in the fall. And you see seasonal flus, which is because our Zheng Qi is actually impaired during this time, especially as we transition. Our lung is going to be a little bit weaker during this season. So having other forms of respiratory support can be really helpful. People often also have skin issues in dogs, cats, and horses. You usually see issues with their coats. Sometimes rain rot shows up summer, late summer, but it depends on which season is damper. It used to be consistent, but with global warming, it's a little bit different. There's also a lot more mold in the air, which contributes to the depletion of the health of the lung meridian. And it's quite often dry. Now with, again, global warming, it's been really damp, at least where I am right now. But typically this is when you see conditions related to dryness, which connects again to the requirement for moisture for both the lung and large intestine. So if we look at the point specifically, and I do rotate animals here, so you'll see a cat picture and you'll see some horse pictures also, because we like to cover points for all our species. We have lung 9. Does anybody remember what type or what category of point lung 9 is?
Source point.
Yes, source point. All right, perfect. So lung 9 is fairly easy to find. If you look for, it's technically a moving point. You can find it if you lift the animal's carpus on a dog, or if you lift their foreleg on a horse. It's where their wrist bends, essentially. Is really good for balancing the entire lung meridian because it again is the source point. It will help rebalance the qi flow along the lung meridian. Our next point here is large intestine 11. This is a key point. It's very helpful for allergies. So if, for example, you're a person that's allergic to ragweed, which has been blooming for the last couple of weeks, this point is extremely helpful this time of year. If you have animals that are allergic to certain plants that bloom at certain times of year, this point is always helpful. But especially we need to boost our lung, large intestine during this transitional time. The easiest way to find it is to lift the elbow and find it on just lateral of the crease in the elbow.
Show it to us with your arm. Show it with your arm.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, because all I can see is the PowerPoint, so I want to make sure that you can see me too. Okay, so if I were a dog, you would lift up the arm, and it's the large intestine meridian comes down slightly lateral to the midline. So on humans, it would be about here.
Okay.
You see
it's
that?
Like when we bend the horse's foreleg.
Yes.
To get, it's close to the elbow.
Yes.
In the crease of the elbow, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Jessie, it's like right above the elbow. As you put your finger down, it stops right sort of at the ulna on the lateral side.
Yes. So because the forearms are where the points get tricky, especially for dogs, or dog to human translation. But we know the large intestine meridian ends on the medial side of the second toe, right? So if we trace that meridian all the way up, it's going to be slightly lateral to the medial side of the arm.
Okay. Yep. I think I got it. Yeah.
Because you have small intestine and triple heater also coming up. So you have to be careful to stay as lateral to the as medial to the front of the leg as you can.
Okay.
That makes sense. It's hard to describe without having an animal here.
Yeah.
Okay, our last one is CV17. I love to include this point for two reasons. One, it's easy to find, so it's easy to show owners how to find it, and they can do it. It's something they can do to participate in the session, but it's also the influential point for respiration because of its locality to the lungs. It's located on the ventral midline on both horses and dogs. If you trace from the back of your elbow when they're standing square, straight to the ventral midline, you're going to sit right into CV17. And especially animals with respiratory conditions, allergies, asthma can be really helpful. I actually showed it to a client of mine whose son has asthma, and he uses it when he has an asthma attack. And the duration and intensity of his asthma attacks have been a lot lower since he started using it. So,
And can I ask,
yeah.
you don't have to push hard, like when applying pressure to CV17, like on a human being. Is it just a slight, or do we have to actually push in?
It's very slight. All the meridians run right underneath the surface of the skin, just the same as they do for the animals. So you don't have to press that hard. Actually, if you feel where it is, especially on women, I find, because usually we have bras, usually it's a little sore in that area, but it's pretty easy to find. On humans, it's dead center of your chest where your nipple line is. So it's going to be upper chest, not quite down to the xiphoid process where your ribs come, your rib cage comes around and it separates, but a little bit higher than that is going to be where that point is on a human.
Is it also at the, like if we stand there and place our elbows next, if we follow the elbow, will we follow the CV17? Will we come into CV17?
If your arm is straight out in front of you like this, it's going to be pretty close. It's usually a little bit lower, but because quadrupeds, the arrangement of their forelimbs are a little bit different than ours, it's easier to use the nipple line for humans.
Okay, because I thought even if I have my elbow bent and I come across, would it
That's
work?
going to be your xiphoid process, roughly.
Okay, so I should go a bit higher.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. Our next season, which we can worry about in December, is going to be fall to winter. So this is typically when you see sore joints, animals that have arthritis or injuries to their bones. Usually they say it gets worse in the winter or in damp environments. You know, we always have that story of the grandfather who says, I know it's going to rain because my knee hurts, because they can sense the dampness in the air because their knee starts hurting. So same argument that typically animals with sore joints, this is when you'll start to see as we transition into winter. Winter is also the season of storage. So typically people have less energy in the winter. This could also be due to less sunlight. For example, humans that have seasonal affective disorder will, as soon as this starts getting dark, like right now it's pitch black outside, they automatically have less energy during this time because their body's telling them to rest and recuperate and take it easy, because before society was all about productivity and getting things done and all of that, that we actually had time to do those things. You know, when it went dark, farmers stopped working because they couldn't see what they were doing, so they could come inside, and this is when they rested. Reproductive issues also typically show up this time of year because it's related to the element of water, which has to do with the season of winter. Quite often, as the temperatures drop, you'll also see an invasion of cold. So again, we're going to talk about pathogens in November's webinar, but here are a couple of points that are especially helpful. First is my favorite point of all time. I will never stop talking about this point. Stomach 36 is the master point for the gastrointestinal tract. So people are always surprised that I mention it here, but it is an endurance point. It's one of its translations of its name is leg 3 mile, which has to do with physical energy. There's an equivalent point on the forelimb, large intestine 10, that's arm 3 mile. And Nancy, who used to do endurance races with her horses, used to use them to help maintain their horse's stamina during endurance races. So it's especially easy to find. I know if you've taken a class with me or another webinar, I've shown you how to find it on your knee. But you put the base of your palm to the top of your kneecap, bend your hand over, take your middle finger and slide it slightly lateral to your knee on both sides. And that's small intestine 30, or sorry, stomach 36.
What about the large intestine 10? Do you have that somewhere? No? How?
I don't. It will be in the Acupoint classifications book.
Oh, yeah, I understand. I thought you were going to show it. Okay.
Oh, essentially, there's 2 points because if the horse's injury, for example, is to the back limb, you may want to choose large intestine 10 over stomach 36 because they're more sensitive in that area. So it's giving you some flexibility in terms of working more comfortably to make sure that the horse is not in pain.
Jesse, can I just ask something quick?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, when you write 0.5 lateral to the tibial crest, where are you measuring? Like, I don't understand where you're measuring from. Where's the starting point for all of these? That's what I don't get.
Okay, so it'll usually say a number and then soon lateral to or medial to whatever it is. So
Yeah.
for example, for stomach 36, you're using the tibial crest as your landmark, and then you're going 0.5 soon lateral to the crest.
Okay, so lateral to the, okay.
Yeah, so for the next one, it's going to be 0.5 soon lateral to the midline. So the midline is going to be your landmark when you're going to find it.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting it now. Yep,
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. So bladder 11 is not an association point. And people are always confused sometimes about which ones are association points, but there are quite a few influential points close to or in the sequence from 13 to 28 of association points along the bladder meridian. Bladder 11 is the influential point 4. Does anybody know?
Bone.
Yes, bone. So for animals with arthritis, super helpful point. It's probably going to be in an area that they're not very sensitive, which is good because a lot of the other points for arthritis or joints are going to be around major joints. So this one is a little bit easier to access. And of course, it's along the bladder meridian. So if we remember how to find our association points, it's going to be 1.5 soon lateral to the dorsal midline. Remember, our soon measurements are relative to the size of the animal's body. So of course, the soon on a horse is going to be much larger than the soon on a dog. Essentially, if the horse is standing square, it's going to be roughly the front of the shoulder blade. But the way that the diagram's moving, because his foreleg is forward, it looks a little bit further back. Bahui is our next one. This one is located at the lumbosacral space. This is essentially helpful for the entire back half of the horse. For lack of a better description, it helps to rebalance not only the spine, but the hips and the lower part of the leg. It's called the point of 100 meetings because a lot of the meridians pass through or around the hip. And it's nicely located on our governing vessel, which of course helps to balance all of the, not only our nervous system, because that's our central nervous system, but also all of the other meridians on that pathway. Our last
is there,
go ahead.
Forgive me, is there an equivalent to of Bahui in the front part of the horse?
Governing vessel 20 is on the top of the head. I think it's actually on one of the other slides. Governing vessel 20 essentially will line up with the front of the ears directly to the top of the head. It has the similar energetics, but quite often with classical points like Bahui or Yintang, which is a point that helps with focus, there isn't really an equivalent substitute.
Okay, because the focus is right above the eyes in the center.
Yes.
And so the governing vessel 20 would be similar to Bahue, but not the equivalent.
Yes. If you wanted, for example, if the animal had a forelimb issue, you could choose something more related to the shoulder, for example, like a triple heater or a large intestine point, because there are a couple points for shoulder. I may have included them in this. But if the horse has a lower back issue, remember there's also bladder 40, the master point for the hips and back. Any point that's locally located on the lower limbs is going to help energetically because of its location. So you can look at, when you're looking for substitutes for points, you can look first at the energetics of what you want to do for the session, but also the physical location of the point itself.
And that's why I was saying, like, Bahue is such an important one.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for something like for the front or the forehand.
Okay.
And well, you've answered, like governing vessel 20 or a triple heater and large intestine is
Mm-hmm.
what would be somewhat similar.
Yeah, I think when we get to, there's a couple webinars we talked about shoulder issues. I believe there's also, since you're signed up for our 4-day hands-on class, it's also in the manual. For that, there's a whole page on shoulder issues. If it's
Okay, but I
specific
was
to
thinking,
forelimb.
like Bahue goes from the spine all the way down to the almost the hooves.
Yes.
So I was looking for something like that would be scapula, shoulder, knee, down to the fetlock.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Just the
Yeah.
equivalent, but for the front. And it's okay if there's not. I've been thinking about that for quite a while.
Let me think about it, and if I think of a point, I'll let you know.
Well, thank you.
No problem. All right. Actually, a really helpful, if it is, again, a back end issue, is our last point, combination. You can actually hold these two together. It's also especially helpful for seniors if you can only do, 1 to 2 or 3 points total. Kidney 3 and bladder 60 are a really great combination. First, because the kidney helps with joint issues, source chi, which will cover our first 2 issues. But bladder 60 also helps with pain. Its nickname is the aspirin point because it helps release endorphins in the body and helps decrease feelings of pain, so that if they have movement issues, this is going to make them feel better. So those are some of the helpful points for fall to winter. We still have a few more seasons to get through, and we're already over our time. So I'm going to try and go. I know some of them have a little less points, so hopefully we'll finish on time. All right, winter to spring is our next one. So if you think about when the snow finally melts and you're going outside and maybe you don't have to wear a coat for the first time in 6 months, this is the issues that typically show up because people are very excited to be outside, and so are the animals. And this is usually when tendon and ligament issues show up, which is our wood element. Again, you also see allergies because it's typically very damp, because in the winter there's snow, and as it melts, the ground stays very wet and retains quite a lot of that moisture. So they're exposed to moisture, they're exposed to, all the pesticides and everything that people put outside. So you quite often see allergies during the season as all of the plants are blooming. You'll also see a condition that's called invasion of wind. And again, that's one of our pathogens we're going to cover in November's webinar. But it can cause a lot of interesting physical indicators. Is what I'm going to say. If you want to learn more, you'll have to come to the next webinar. You'll also see hip problems, and there's a lot of toxin exposure as people start going outside more. This is, typically when people do deworming, they start using flea and tick medication, things like that. So these are a couple of points that will help with these issues. The first one is gallbladder 34. This is the influential point for tendons and ligaments. So if you have an animal that tends to get excited and overexert themselves in the spring, this is going to be a helpful point for you. I actually noticed too, as my dog gets older, that this point is usually a little bit warm on her because she likes to sprint really fast after squirrels in the spring. and it does not bode well for her tendons and ligaments. Bladder 40, I mentioned on the last slide, is actually the master point for the hips and back. So if you have an animal that, doesn't like dampness, but as it starts to get a little warmer, they're excited to go out again and then they hurt themselves, this is a really helpful point for that. Liver 3 is a really helpful detox point. So if you start giving your animal their yearly vaccinations, or if you give them flea and tick around this time of year or heartworm medication, using liver and spleen points are going to be especially helpful to help them flush that out of their system so they don't have a reaction to it. I've actually had a couple of clients of mine where their animal took the medication and then got really sick for a week. I went into the session and then they felt better the next day. So always be careful about what products you're using on your animals. All right. Spring to summer. As it starts to get warmer, you'll notice the body temperature and our animal's ability to disperse that extra heat will become a little bit impaired because it's going to be constantly challenged. So this is quite often when we see an invasion of heat in the body. You'll also see cardiovascular issues, meaning our body's working harder because it's warmer. So the heart has to work harder to pump everything through our body. And of course, our pores are much more open as we're trying to sweat. So if you have cardiovascular issues, your body may have a hard time sweating, which is how we expel some of the toxins and the body heat. Here are the 2 shoulder points that I was talking about. Shoulder issues are quite common because people are a lot more active in the summer than they are in the spring. And you'll also see restlessness. So this is usually, in some countries, the first time where it's warm enough to spend some serious time outside. So there's a lot more social interaction. And for some animals, this can result in some restless behaviors because they want to go and see their friend, and then they want to go and do this, and they're just so busy that they want a lot of things, and it's hard for them to contain all that excess young because summer is the season of young, and we want to make sure to keep them balanced. So the first point I want to talk about is governing vessel 14. This is essentially if your animal is overheating or having, hopefully not a heat stroke, but that's more an emergency condition, you would call the vet anyway. But governing vessel 14 can help to expel excess body heat. If your animal is overheating, if there's no shade in their environment, or if you're out, for example, on a trail ride or out for a walk with your dog and there's no shade where you are, you can use this point to help cool them down. Especially be careful about the temperature of the surfaces that they're walking on because they can hurt their feet. We also have 2 point combinations for you. The first is Heart 7 and Pericardium 7. These are both source points. They're at the same distance up the leg. One is on the lateral side, which is the heart, and the pericardium source point is the equivalent height, but on the medial side. And these points are very helpful with relationship building, trust. Of course, the heart is also related to circulation, so it's helping to make sure that everything's pumped through the body. There's a lot of really helpful points. Again, bonus point, the influential point for arteries. Does anybody know what it is? I love when nobody knows the answer to that one. Okay, so lung 9 is also the influential point for arteries. So if you have an older animal that's lethargic and doesn't have a lot of movement, or if you have someone that has, for example, heart bypass surgery, it can help make sure that their arteries aren't getting clogged and kind of helping with the circulation of everything. If they do have a stent or something for people, you want to be a little bit careful because you don't want to drastically increase the circulation. You don't want to make their blood pressure fluctuate too much. Our last 2 is our shoulder pair. So for animals that have difficulty or an injury to the shoulder, especially animals that have repetitive strain injuries, or if they were bumped by something, for example, a horse jumping over a jump and they didn't pick up their front feet and keep bumping their feet on the jump, these two shoulder points can be helpful because it will help strengthen the joint so they can improve the mobility of the joint itself. So we have large intestine 15, which is essentially in front of the acromion or the front of the shoulder, and triple heater 14, which is the same height up the leg, but on the back of the acromion instead of the front. So
And
some
you
really
can
help.
use them, you can
Pardon?
use them together. You can use them together.
You can hold them together, but they still count as 2 points instead of 1.
It's a
They're
little
just
bit like
helpful
bladder 60 and kidney 3.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you can hold them together and that way they're the same as kidney 3 and bladder 60, but kidney 3 and bladder 60 and heart 7 and pericardium 7 both count as 1 point instead of 2. Large
Oh.
intestine 15 and triple heater 14 still count as 2, but they're easier to hold at the same time. So if you have an older animal with an injury, just keep that in mind because it still counts as the normal number of points. All right, we have one more season, summer to late summer. So typically issues you see during this time of year have to do with an invasion of dampness in the body, because as late summer comes along, some of the things start molding a little bit. This is when we're starting to get ready for fall. So you start to see digestive complaints during this period because late summer is the season of earth. You see a lot of sore muscles because the animals, again, have been super busy during the summer and they start to slow down a little bit as the weather gets cooler. There's usually a lot of sinus or allergy conditions here. You'll notice that allergies were listed on a few of the seasonal transitions because they're so closely tied to the immune system and Zheng Qi. So during seasonal transitions, when the weather makes very drastic changes, this is when our Zheng Qi is the most impaired because our immune system and our body environment is trying to adapt to the external changes. So anytime there's a seasonal transition around an equinox or a solstice, taking some immune support is never a bad thing. So spleen 3 is our first one. We know that spleen 3 is a source point. So it's going to help balance. Now, something you'll learn about dampness in November's webinar is that it most strongly affects the spleen. So if we can support the spleen during this transition, especially as we move into late summer, this is going to be really helpful in supporting not only the digestion, but the spleen also nourishes the muscles. So making sure that our body is getting the rest that it needs and we're giving our muscles time to nourish and recuperate after our heavy exercise in the summer. Spleen 9 is especially helpful at expelling dampness. It's also a spleen point, so it's going to help with digestive and sore muscles also. It's also a bit of a detox point. So if you have any people who are last minute, for example, spraying their lawns with weed killer or something like that, that it's a good time of year to use this point. Stomach 42 is the source point for the stomach meridian. So it's going to help with digestive complaints and also help to support the spleen with sore muscles. We also know that the immune system is supported when our digestive system is working properly, which is our stomach and our spleen. So any stomach and spleen points will also help to support the lung because that's where our immune system is housed, essentially. And there's the governing vessel 20 point that I was talking about, that it's located at the cranial edge of the ear, directly on the top of the head. For humans, this is actually our Bahwei point because it's the point on our body that's highest or closest to the heavens. So our GV20 is equivalent to a dog or a horse's Bahwei in function a little bit. So you could use it as an equivalent, Joanne. It really depends on where the soreness is, but it's not specifically going to help with the forelimb because it is a governing vessel point. It's going to help with the entire spine, but go a little bit less so into the limbs, if that makes sense. Okay. So in summary, I know that was a lot of information. Zheng Qi is our body's ability to resist disease, which is strengthened by having strong qi, specifically our yin qi, our chest qi, and our source qi. The health of the immune system is influenced by many, many external and internal factors, which we talked about. The health of the immune system and our lymphocytes, all the way down to our blood, is going to be influenced by the quality of our qi, making sure that the food we eat and the air we breathe, we're not exposed to a lot of chemicals. And lastly, seasonal transitions are times of transformation, both internally as our physiology changes to adapt to the environment, and externally with the weather and the climate and the season of life that we're in, and should be supported using the acupoints that we showed you. So if you want to learn a little bit more about how to do a session or how to apply some of these acupressure points that we've shown you, we do have hands-on courses. We have most of our 2023 schedule up. So if you're interested, we have classes in Canada and the US. I'm actually teaching in both Ontario and Calgary this coming year. We have both small animal, which is dog and cat, as well as our equine classes. And it's always a lot of fun. We love the engagement that the students have because they always ask questions, which the other students learn so much from. So it's always, we love questions. We love to be able to answer questions because everybody learns when we ask questions. So a couple of key acupressure points that we learn. Again, there are 362 points, I believe. And these are just a couple of the ones that you learn. So not only do you learn association points, source points, master points, and in our 4-day class, you learn more influential points. There's classical points, such as Yin Tong, which helps with focus, governing vessel 26, which is our emergency resuscitation point. And on a dog, this is actually large intestine 11, the allergy point, Helen. So if you want to see what it looks like on an actual dog, that's where it's located, in the crease of the elbow, or yes, in the crease of the elbow. If you're someone who likes to learn on their own and have resources and references to be able to check back on that information, we do have our animal series of books available, depending on what species you want to work on, that cover a little bit of theory, a little bit of specific conditions, and have some really helpful reference pages in the back. If you're someone who just likes to do a quick glance and check on things, we have our 5-element charts that it comes in a set, and you get not only the front page, which shows you the creation and control cycle used for 5-element theory point selection, which is a whole class, but it also has a page for each of the meridian pairs. So the earth element, for example, will show you the stomach and spleen and key points along the entire meridian. They're really helpful. I have both a dog and a horse set because I like to reference them a lot. And of course, we have lots of videos, articles, and our semi-regular webinars. But speaking of webinars, I've mentioned it a couple times. These are the extra references that I used to get some of the more complex information about the immune system. So Joanne, if you're looking for other resources to add to learn a little bit more when you're finished the program, you can always come back to this webinar and check this slide. Our next webinar that I've mentioned a couple of times is going to be Monday, November 28th at the same time, 6:30 EST. And we're going to talk about the 6 exogenous pathogens. I came up with the topic actually last year, and I've been waiting all year to do it. We tried to plan it for November because this is when people usually get sick. So not only are you going to learn about the major exogenous pathogens, of which there are 6, but you're going to learn what meridians they affect, for example, the spleen or the liver, what indicators they cause in the animal. So what will the animal present with if they have an invasion of a certain pathogen? And of course, acupoints to help support or dispel each of the pathogens. So if anybody has any questions, we'll get to that. But for those who are watching the replay, Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to any questions that you have. Feel free to email us at tallgrassnorthamerica@gmail.com, and we hope to see you at a future webinar.
Sounds good.
And
Thank you.